Welcome back to Face the Nation. We're joined now by Jay Sekulow. He's a member of the president's legal team and chief counsel at the American Center for Law and Justice. Mr. Sekulow, I want to start this morning with the president's tweet in which he wrote,
Sure.
I'm being investigated for firing the FBI director by the man who told me to fire the FBI director. Witch hunt. What's he talking about?
The president issued that tweet on social media because of the report in the Washington Post from 5 anonymous sources, none of which, of course, anyone knows about, alleging that the president was under investigation in this purported expanded probe. The fact of the matter is the president has not been and is not under investigation. So this was his response via Twitter, via social media, was in response to the Washington Post piece with 5 anonymous sources. And by the way, John, 5 anonymous sources, they don't even identify the agencies upon which these individuals purportedly work. So the response there is clear. And I want to be very clear about this. The president is not and has not been under investigation.
How do you know?
Because we've received no notice of investigation. There's been no notification from the special counsel's office that the president is under investigation. In fact, to the contrary. What we know is what James Comey said, the last thing we know when he testified just a couple weeks back, that the president was not and is not a target of an investigation.
Of course, there have been events since James Comey told him that. Is it your view, and just to educate viewers, that if you were under investigation, there would be an obligation for the special counsel to let you know? Couldn't you be under investigation and they're just not letting you know yet?
Well, look, I can't imagine a scenario where the president would not be aware of it. Number one, there's a serious constitutional issue here. I mean, I want you to think about the context upon which this would take place under the Washington Post's theory of the case. This is the Washington Post theory, that the president of the United States, after being advised by his attorney general and the office of the deputy attorney general, determined to remove James Comey from the FBI directorship. If the Washington Post leaks were correct, the president of the United States would be, if this was correct, under investigation for taking the action that the Department of Justice asked him to take. That raises not only it's not a serious constitutional question, it's an easy constitutional question. That's impossible. The president cannot be investigated, or certainly cannot be found liable for engaging in an activity that he clearly has powers to do under the Constitution.
Powers to fire the FBI director. And let me ask you this question more.
James Comey acknowledged that, by the way, John. I mean, James Comey said he served at the pleasure of the president.
More broadly, the big question really is, did the president interfere in any way in the investigation that James Comey was undertaking?
No, in fact, he said to the contrary. Remember, in part of the interviews that he's given, he acknowledged that when he removed James Comey, especially during the Lester Holt interview, when you read the entire context, the transcript of that interview, he acknowledged that by firing James Comey as FBI director, the president acknowledged that he would, in fact, probably extend the nature and length of the scope of the FBI, the special counsel probe. But he thought it would be the best for the American people. And look, I've got the letter.
Let me ask you.
And the 2 letters from both the, it's important here. The FBI director was removed after a deliberative process, and in part based on, of course, the statements coming from his own attorney general and deputy attorney general, who said, and I want to read this, as a result, the FBI is unlikely to regain public and congressional trust until it has a director who understands the gravity of the mistakes and pledges to never repeat them. Having refused to admit his errors, the director cannot be expected to implement the necessary corrective changes. So this is not coming out of whole cloth. This is coming out of recommendation. Yes, sir.
The president said he would speak under oath about all this. That, I assume, is still true?
Yeah, the president was very clear about that. He said that if he was asked to do it, he would. That's been asked and addressed. Again,
would he
I want to be clear here.
With Congress? Would he? Because you got this investigation going on. It takes a long time. He could kind of short circuit by just going up to Congress. Senator Graham and others have called him to testify in front of Congress. Could that get at this faster?
Well, that doesn't short-circuit anything. There's multiple tracks of investigations going on here, which is problematic, because once the special counsel was appointed, it changes the nature of who can and who will not participate before Congress. So I haven't discussed that with the president at all. He stated he would testify under oath. He didn't specify the venue. We'll just leave that as it is. Again, there are multiple tracks of investigation. But again, I want to be clear here. The president is not under investigation. James Comey said it. Nothing has changed since then.
The president said last week he would release the tapes of, if there were tapes, of his conversation this week. That hasn't happened. Where is that?
I think the president is going to address that in the week ahead. There was a lot of issues this past week. The president gave a major address in Cuba. We had the assassination attempt of Steve Scalise. There were a lot of intervening factors. So the issue of the tapes, I think right now was not priority issue number one when the country was facing an assassination attempt on Steve Scalise and other members of Congress and their staffs, by the way. And our thoughts and prayers still with them. I know he's still in a very difficult situation. But also, he gave a major address on the situation in Cuba and the attempt there to reconcile and redraft a policy that makes sense. So the president has a lot of issues, and I think this shows that the president is concentrating on governing. This issue will be addressed in due course, I suspect, next week.
All right. Jay Sekulow, thanks so much.
Thank you for having me.